The chill that snaked up my spine had nothing to do with the draft from the open window. It was the kind of cold that settled deep in your bones, a premonition, a quiet hum of wrongness that had been buzzing beneath the surface for weeks, maybe even months, but which I'd stubbornly, foolishly, ignored. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray, drizzly day that usually made me want to curl up with a book and a mug of tea, but today, the mundane comfort of our shared apartment felt like a stage set for a drama I hadn't auditioned for. My fingers, still damp from rinsing the last coffee cup, traced the smooth, cool leather of the small, rectangular box. It wasn't just the box itself, sleek and understated, nestled in the back of Julian's sock drawer, a place I rarely ventured, but had today, looking for a misplaced charger. It was the weight of it, the almost imperceptible scent of a foreign perfume clinging to the velvet lining, and the glint of something undeniably expensive within. A pair of cufflinks. Not just any cufflinks, but intricate, art-deco pieces, silver and onyx, with a tiny, almost invisible engraving on the back, a single, elegant L. Julian didn't wear cufflinks. Not ever. His style was effortlessly casual, a carefully curated blend of vintage band tees, well-worn jeans, and the occasional linen shirt for a fancy dinner, which for him usually meant a bistro with exposed brick and craft beer. He abhorred anything that felt too formal, too restrictive. He'd once joked that the only time he'd wear cufflinks was at his own wedding, and even then, he'd probably try to sneak in some quirky, mismatched novelty ones. These, however, were anything but quirky. They reeked of old money, of quiet luxury, of a world that Julian, with his stories of a humble upbringing and his self-made success, had always claimed to disdain. My thumb brushed over the L again, a tiny, sharp point of ice in the growing dread. L for what? Not a Lara. Not Julian. A name. A person. Someone I didn't know. The kitchen, usually a sanctuary of warmth and the lingering aroma of Julian's terrible but endearing attempts at baking, now felt vast and echoing, each tick of the wall clock a hammer blow against the fragile peace I'd constructed around us. The drizzle outside intensified, tapping a relentless rhythm against the window pane, mirroring the frantic beat of my own heart. I carefully placed the box back, pushing it deeper into the drawer, as if by hiding it, I could unsee what I had seen, unfeel the tremor that had begun in my hands. It felt like a betrayal even before I understood what was being betrayed. It was the feeling of being fundamentally wrong about someone, about us. Julian and I had built our world on a foundation of absolute transparency, or so I'd believed. We'd shared everything, our dreams, our fears, our embarrassing childhood anecdotes, the precise moment we'd both realized we were falling in love, sitting on a park bench under a canopy of autumn leaves, sharing a ridiculously overpriced ice cream cone. He'd been the one to insist on it, on the open book policy, on the idea that true intimacy meant no secrets, no hidden corners. He'd said it made him feel safe, truly seen, for the first time in his life. And I, utterly smitten, had embraced it, pouring out my soul, trusting him with every vulnerable part of myself. He was my anchor, my confidant, the one who saw the messy parts of me and still chose to stay. Or so I had thought. Our story had started like a whirlwind, the kind you read about in novels and scoff at, thinking, no one actually falls that fast. But we did. It was a rainy Tuesday, almost exactly 2 years ago, when I'd stumbled into the coffee shop where he worked part-time while supposedly figuring things out after leaving a high-pressure corporate job. I was drenched, my umbrella having staged a dramatic collapse in the face of an unexpected downpour, and I was late for a meeting. He'd looked up from wiping down the counter, his eyes, the color of warm honey, crinkling at the corners as he offered me a free latte and a dry napkin. His laugh, a low, rumbling sound, had instantly disarmed me. We talked for what felt like minutes but must have been an hour, missing my meeting entirely, and somehow, by the time I left, I knew that something significant had shifted. He was witty, charming, incredibly intelligent, and possessed a quiet intensity that drew me in like a moth to a flame. He spoke of art, philosophy, the absurdity of modern life, and his dreams of opening a small, independent bookstore, dreams that resonated deeply with my own love for literature and quiet spaces. He made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way no one ever had before. He remembered tiny details I'd casually mentioned, brought me obscure books he thought I'd like, and listened with an unwavering gaze that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He was everything I hadn't known I was looking for. We moved in together 6 months later, a decision that felt both impulsive and utterly right. Our apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom with a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street, quickly became our sanctuary. We filled it with mismatched furniture, stacks of books, and the comfortable chaos of 2 lives intertwining. We cooked together, laughed until our stomachs hurt, and spent countless evenings curled on the sofa, sharing silences that felt more intimate than any conversation. He was attentive, affectionate, always ready with a comforting hug or a silly joke when I was stressed. He'd leave me little notes on the fridge, bring me flowers for no reason, and remember my favorite obscure brand of tea. He was, in every sense of the word, perfect. Or, at least, the version of perfect I had constructed in my mind, a carefully curated image built on shared moments and whispered promises. The cufflinks, however, were a jagged crack in that perfect facade. The first real tremor, the one I dismissed as a minor earthquake, had happened a few months ago. Julian had started taking these business trips. Not long ones, just a day or 2, sometimes 3. He was supposedly consulting for a small tech startup, helping them with their marketing strategy. It sounded plausible enough. He was brilliant, charismatic, and could talk anyone into anything. But the details were always vague. Just a quick trip to the coast, darling, nothing exciting. Or, meeting some potential investors, you know how it is. He'd be unusually quiet before he left, a subtle tension in his jaw, and he'd come back looking exhausted, almost haunted. His phone, usually left lying around, would suddenly become an extension of his hand, face down, screen locked. If I ever happened to glance at it, he'd snatch it up with a practiced swiftness that bordered on defensive. Work stuff, he'd mumble, or just checking emails. I'd tell myself it was stress, the pressure of a new venture, the demands of a demanding client. He was a private person, after all, and I respected his space. I told myself that over and over, a mantra against the rising tide of unease. One evening, after one of these trips, I'd found a crumpled receipt in his jacket pocket. It was for a high-end boutique hotel, not in the coastal town he'd mentioned, but in a city 3 hours inland, a city known for its sprawling financial district and luxury shopping. The date on the receipt was from the night he was supposedly staying with a friend to save money. My heart had hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. When I'd asked him about it, casually, trying to keep my voice light, he'd paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then, he'd laughed, a charming, dismissive sound. "Oh, that? Yeah, we had a last-minute change of plans. The client wanted to meet closer to their main office, so we booked a room there for convenience. Didn't want to bother you with the details, you know how I hate making a fuss." He'd pulled me into a hug then, burying his face in my hair, his voice muffled. "You worry too much, my love. Everything's fine. Just tired." And I, desperate to believe him, desperate to cling to the image of the man I loved, had let it go. I'd told myself it made sense, that I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking things. He was just considerate, not wanting to burden me with trivial travel logistics. The receipt had ended up in the trash, and the incident had been filed away under Alara's irrational anxieties. But the cufflinks. They were different. They weren't a crumpled receipt that could be explained away by a last-minute change of plans. They were a tangible, undeniable object, a piece of someone else's story intruding into ours. They spoke of a different life, a different persona, a level of formality and expense that simply didn't align with the Julian I knew, the Julian who shared my small, imperfect life. The L felt like a taunt, a silent accusation. I stood in the living room, the late afternoon light fading, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken questions. My gaze drifted to the framed photo on the mantelpiece, Julian and me, laughing, our arms wrapped around each other, taken on that very first autumn day in the park. His smile, so genuine, so full of warmth, now seemed to hold a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place, a shadow beneath the surface. Had it always been there? Had I just been too blind, too willing to see only what I wanted to see? The sound of his key in the lock jolted me back to the present. My breath caught in my throat. He was home. The moment of truth, or perhaps the moment of further deception, was upon me. My hands still trembled slightly, and I quickly wiped them on my jeans, trying to compose myself, to erase the fear from my face. I didn't want him to see it, didn't want to give him any ammunition, any reason to turn my anxiety back on me. The front door creaked open, and his familiar voice, warm and melodic, filled the small entryway. "Ilara? Darling, I'm home." He sounded tired, but also cheerful, as if nothing in the world was amiss. The smell of the damp outside clung to him, mixed with a faint, unfamiliar scent, not the perfume from the Cufflinks, but something equally foreign, a hint of expensive cologne, perhaps? My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments, trying to make sense of the growing dissonance between the man I loved and the unsettling clues that kept surfacing. I walked towards him, a forced smile on my lips, my heart pounding a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The Cufflinks, hidden deep in his drawer, felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. I had to know. I had to. But how? And what would I do if the answer confirmed my deepest fears? The thought alone was a cold, sharp knife twisting in my gut. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a silent battle already underway, though only one of us knew it. His arms wrapped around me, a familiar comfort that suddenly felt like a cage. "Rough day," he murmured, his lips brushing my hair. I nodded, unable to speak, the lie already forming on my tongue. "Just a bit tired," I managed, echoing his own words from months ago, the irony a bitter taste in my mouth. He squeezed me tighter, oblivious, or so it seemed, to the seismic shift that had just occurred in my world. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, trying to find the courage to face the truth, whatever it might be. The game, I realized, had just begun. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy, a performance I hoped Julian wasn't seeing through. Every interaction felt layered, every casual glance from him a potential probe into my carefully constructed facade. I found myself scrutinizing his every move, every word, searching for tells, for cracks in the charming exterior. He seemed oblivious, or perhaps, he was just that good. He'd come home, kiss me hello, ask about my day, and settle into our evening routine with an ease that was almost unnerving. We'd eat dinner, watch a show, talk about mundane things, the leaky faucet, the annoying neighbor, a new recipe I wanted to try. All the while, the image of the Cufflinks, the elegant L, was burned into my mind, a constant, nagging whisper. I hadn't brought them up. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more. More proof, more certainty, something beyond a gut feeling and a pair of misplaced accessories. I hated myself for the suspicion, for the way it was poisoning everything, turning my beloved Julian into a potential stranger. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. My research began subtly. I started paying more attention to his phone habits. He was still incredibly protective of it, always keeping it face down, always taking calls in the other room if they seemed work-related. He'd developed a habit of keeping it on silent, relying on vibrations, which meant I never heard it ring. This was new. He used to leave it on the kitchen counter, notifications chiming freely. Now, it was almost always in his pocket, or if it was out, it was locked, screen dark. I tried to remember if he'd ever given me his password. He hadn't. Not explicitly. We'd always just used each other's devices freely, assuming trust. But now, if I picked up his phone, even just to move it, he'd immediately reach for it, a subtle but definite tension in his shoulders. Just checking something, he'd say, or need to reply to this email. It was always an email. I also started observing his business trips more closely. He'd announce them with a casual air, but I noticed a pattern. They always seemed to fall on specific days of the week, usually midweek, and he'd always return late, claiming traffic or a particularly long meeting. I tried cross-referencing the cities he mentioned with the dates. The coastal town, the inland city. He never offered to show me flight details or hotel bookings, and I, in my naive trust, had never asked. Now, the omission felt glaring. I started looking up the companies he claimed to be consulting for. Most were small, obscure startups with minimal online presence. One, a supposed innovative tech solutions company, had a website that looked like it had been built in the early 2000s and hadn't been updated since. No employee directory, no recent news, just a generic contact form. It felt off. Too generic. Too flimsy. But again, I rationalized. Maybe they were just starting out, maybe they were deliberately low profile. My mind was a battlefield, loyalty warring with creeping doubt. One evening, while he was in the shower, I felt a desperate urge to look for more. It felt wrong, invasive, a violation of the trust one still clung to, but the need to know, to either confirm my fears or put them to rest, was overwhelming. His laptop was open on his desk, a spreadsheet visible on the screen. He often left it unlocked. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the keyboard. This was it. The line I hadn't crossed. But the cufflinks, the L, the vague trips, the guarded phone, they pushed me forward. My fingers trembled as I clicked on the browser icon. His history was mostly innocuous: news sites, sports, a few articles about obscure historical events he was interested in. But then, I saw it. A recently visited link to a luxury watch retailer. I clicked on it, and there, staring back at me, was a page for a women's watch. A delicate, rose gold piece with a mother-of-pearl face. It was beautiful. And expensive. Far more expensive than anything Julian had ever bought me, or even himself. My stomach lurched. He'd never mentioned buying a watch, let alone one like this. Who was it for? My mind immediately went to the L. Was this for her? Was he buying gifts for someone else? The thought was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I quickly closed the tab, my heart hammering, and minimized the browser, trying to make it look like I hadn't touched anything. The sound of the shower turning off sent me scrambling back to the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a book. "Everything okay, love?" he asked, walking into the living room, a towel wrapped around his waist, water still dripping from his hair. His eyes, those warm honey eyes, seemed to pierce right through me. I forced a smile, a little too wide, a little too bright. "Just reading," I chirped, my voice sounding unnaturally high. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and disappeared into the bedroom to get dressed. I exhaled, a long, shaky breath, my body trembling. The watch. The cufflinks. The L. It was all starting to connect, forming a terrifying picture. He wasn't just being vague about work, he was building a separate life, one I wasn't a part of. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The man I loved, the man I trusted implicitly, was lying to me. And not just about small things, but about fundamental aspects of his life. The pain was sharp, immediate, a searing wound in my chest. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. How could I have been so blind? So foolish? So willing to believe every charming lie? The next morning, I woke up with a cold resolve. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tempered by a fierce anger. I couldn't live in this state of agonizing uncertainty. I needed concrete proof, something undeniable. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Julian had left early for another business trip. As soon as the door clicked shut, I was up, my mind racing. I went straight to his desk. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened his laptop, found the browser history, and scrolled. I went back weeks, then months, looking for anything out of place. It was a tedious, painstaking process. Most of it was mundane, as before. But then, I found it. A series of searches for engagement rings, not just any rings, but specific, high-end designs, diamond cuts, and settings. And the dates, they stretched back for almost a year. A year. He had been looking at engagement rings for a year. For someone. But not for me. We had talked about marriage, yes, casually, dreamily, but he had always said he wasn't ready, that we needed to be more financially stable, that he wanted to wait for the perfect moment. And I had believed him. I had respected his timeline. Now, the bitter irony of his words choked me. He was ready. Just not for me. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a desperate energy coursing through me. I searched for the specific ring designs, cross-referencing them with images. And then, I saw it. An Instagram post. A public profile, but with a surprising number of followers. A woman. Beautiful, elegant, with long, dark hair and striking green eyes. And on her left hand, a ring. The exact ring from Julian's search history. My breath hitched. It couldn't be. My eyes scanned the profile, a frantic search for any connection. And there it was, in her bio, Lila Dubois. The elegant L from the Cufflinks. My vision blurred. Lila Dubois. A prominent architect, according to her profile, based in the very city where Julian had claimed to have those last-minute client meetings. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. The luxury hotel receipt, the vague business trips, the guarded phone, the expensive watch, the cufflinks, the engagement ring searches. It was all for her. Lila. I scrolled through her photos, each one a fresh stab to the heart. Photos of her at glamorous events, at exotic locations, at fancy restaurants. And in many of them, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious, was Julian. Not just in the background, but by her side, his arm around her, his head tilted towards hers, his smile wide and genuine. He looked happy. Happier, perhaps, than he had looked with me in months. There were photos of them on a romantic getaway, hiking in the mountains, laughing over glasses of wine. Photos of them at what looked like family gatherings, with older people who resembled Lila, Julian looking comfortable, at ease, like he belonged. He had introduced me to his family, yes, but it had always been a strained affair, his parents aloof, his siblings distant. He'd always said they weren't very close, that he'd practically raised himself. But here, with Lila's family, he looked like a beloved son-in-law. My stomach twisted. He wasn't just having an affair, he was living a double life. A complete, fully formed, parallel existence that I knew nothing about. The sheer audacity of it, the depth of the deception, was breathtaking. I found a photo of them from just last week, Julian in a crisp suit, Lila in a stunning evening gown, at what appeared to be a black tie gala. And there, on his wrists, were the cufflinks. The silver and onyx ones, glinting under the lights. The ones with the L. He'd worn them. For her. While telling me he was working late on a big project. The hypocrisy, the blatant disregard for my feelings, was a physical ache. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the mouse. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal, guttural sound of anguish and rage. But I couldn't. Not yet. I was alone in the apartment, Julian miles away, probably with her. I needed to be calm. I needed to think. I needed to gather myself before I shattered into a million pieces. The humiliation was already searing, a hot flush spreading across my face. To think of all the times I had defended him, rationalized his behavior, dismissed my own instincts. To think of all the friends I had gushed to about our perfect relationship, the family members who adored him. How utterly foolish I must seem. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark, reflecting my own distorted, tear-streaked face. The silence in the apartment was deafening, punctuated only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. I walked to the window, staring out at the gray sky, but seeing nothing. My world had imploded. The man I loved, the man I had built my future around, was a stranger. A liar. A cheat. And he had been doing it for a year. A whole year of lies, of carefully constructed deception, while I had been living in a blissful, ignorant bubble. The pain was almost unbearable, a suffocating weight on my chest. But beneath the pain, a cold, hard anger began to simmer. It wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about the gaslighting, the way he had systematically made me doubt my own sanity, my own perceptions. He had made me feel crazy for even having a fleeting suspicion. He had twisted my reality, and for that, he would pay. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with tears and pleas. With something far more precise, far more devastating. I didn't know what yet, but a seed of revenge, cold and sharp, had been planted in the fertile ground of my shattered heart. The game was indeed on, and this time I was playing to win. The following days were a cruel pantomime. Julian returned, full of his usual charm, recounting vague anecdotes from his trip, asking about my day with an almost unsettling normalcy. I forced myself to respond, to smile, to pretend everything was fine. My internal world, however, was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, grief, rage, profound humiliation, and a chilling resolve. I watched him, truly watched him, for the first time, and saw the subtle tells I had been too blind, too trusting, to notice before. The way his eyes darted away when he was fabricating a detail, the slight tension in his jaw when I asked a probing question, the almost imperceptible hesitation before he launched into another elaborate story. He was a master performer, and I, his most devoted audience, had been completely duped. The thought made my stomach churn. I started to meticulously gather evidence. I revisited Lila's Instagram, not just scrolling, but taking screenshots, noting dates, locations, and the people in the photos. I cross-referenced Julian's business trips with her posts, finding undeniable overlaps. He'd been in the same city, at the same time, often in the same outfits he'd worn on his supposed work excursions. I even found a photo of him at a restaurant he'd claimed to be at with a client, but in Lila's photo, he was clearly with her and her family. The layers of deceit were staggering. I also started subtly digging into his financial records, something I'd always had access to but never scrutinized. We had a joint account for household expenses, and his personal account was linked for transfers. I found large, recurring transfers to an unfamiliar account, labeled vaguely as consulting fees. The amounts were significant, far more than he claimed to be earning from his startup consulting. It was likely money he was spending on Lila, on their shared life, on the gifts I'd found. He was not just cheating, he was financially entwined with her, potentially even supporting her or their joint lifestyle with money he should have been contributing to our shared future. The thought was a fresh wave of nausea. My friends, bless their unsuspecting hearts, kept asking about Julian. "How's Julian doing?" "Still working on that big project," they'd inquire, their voices full of genuine warmth. I'd offer vague, non-committal answers, my smile feeling brittle, my throat tight. I couldn't bring myself to tell them, not yet. The shame was too immense. The thought of admitting how completely I'd been fooled, how utterly naive I'd been, was unbearable. My family, particularly my mother, adored Julian. He had charmed them all, presenting himself as the perfect, stable, loving partner. He'd spent holidays with us, listened patiently to my father's endless golf stories, and even helped my brother move furniture. He was, in their eyes, the son they never had. The idea of shattering that illusion, of revealing the man they admired was a fraud, felt like an impossible task. It wasn't just my heart that was broken, it was my entire social fabric, woven tightly around the lie he had created. I began to plan. I knew I couldn't confront him directly. He was too good at gaslighting, too skilled at twisting narratives. He would deny, deflect, blame me for being paranoid, for invading his privacy. He would turn it around, make me the villain, and I would end up feeling even more confused and humiliated. No, this had to be strategic. It had to be public. It had to be undeniable. I needed to expose him in a way that left no room for doubt, no space for his charming lies to take root. The idea of a public humiliation, something akin to the viral breakup confessionals I'd seen online, began to form in my mind. But it couldn't be petty or vindictive. It had to be about truth, about reclaiming my narrative, about showing the world the true face of the man I had loved. It had to be about justice. The opportunity presented itself in the most unexpected way. Julian had been hinting for weeks about a big announcement. He'd been unusually secretive, his phone calls even more hushed, his demeanor a mix of nervous excitement and suppressed glee. He'd told me he was planning a small, intimate gathering at our apartment, just our closest friends and family, to share some exciting news about his startup. He'd even asked me to help him prepare, to bake his famous, and terrible, lemon bars, to choose the playlist, to make sure the apartment looked perfect. The irony was a bitter pill. He was planning to announce something, and I had a chilling suspicion I knew exactly what it was. He was going to announce his engagement to Lila. To me. In our apartment. With my friends and family present. The thought was so audacious, so cruel, that it almost made me laugh hysterically. This was it. This was my moment. I started preparing my own announcement. I spent hours crafting a document, a meticulously detailed timeline of his lies, complete with screenshots, financial records, and cross-referenced dates. I included photos of him with Lila, photos of the engagement ring, photos of the cufflinks. I wrote down every instance of gaslighting, every time he had made me doubt myself. It was a painful, cathartic process, each word a release of the pent-up anguish and rage. I made sure it was factual, undeniable, and presented in a way that left no room for his usual charming deflections. I also started reaching out to a few trusted friends, subtly, testing the waters, hinting at some troubling things I'd discovered about Julian. Their initial reactions were disbelief, then concern, then a quiet understanding. They knew me, knew I wasn't prone to dramatics or paranoia. Their support, even in its nascent stages, was a lifeline. The day of the announcement arrived, a crisp Saturday afternoon. The apartment was filled with the scent of my lemon bars, the soft hum of conversation, and the nervous energy that always accompanies a big reveal. My heart was a frantic drum, but my hands were steady. I wore the dress he loved, a simple navy blue, but I felt like a warrior in armor. Julian was buzzing with excitement, his eyes sparkling, his usual charming self amplified by the anticipation. He greeted everyone with effusive hugs, his arm often around me, pulling me close, playing the part of the loving partner to perfection. My stomach churned with disgust. He was truly a monster, wearing a human mask. As the guests settled, drinks in hand, Julian clinked his glass, calling for attention. A hush fell over the room. He stood in the center of the living room, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, a confident, triumphant smile on his face. He began to speak, his voice resonating with practiced ease. He spoke of his journey, his struggles, his new venture, painting a picture of a man who had overcome adversity to achieve his dreams. He spoke of finding true happiness and building a future. My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. I could feel the eyes of my friends and family on me, their expressions expectant, happy for us. They thought this was our announcement. The thought made me sick. "And now," he said, his voice swelling with emotion, "I have some incredibly special news to share with all of you, especially with the woman who has been my rock, my inspiration, my everything." He turned to me, his eyes shining, and reached for my hand. A gasp rippled through the room. My mother teared up, my friends exchanged knowing smiles. They thought he was going to propose. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. The ultimate public declaration. And in that moment, as his fingers closed around mine, a cold, clear clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about exposing him, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, my truth. It was about showing him, and everyone else, that I was not a fool, not a victim, but a woman who had been wronged, and who would not be silenced. The air thrummed with anticipation, the silence almost unbearable. He squeezed my hand, a loving gesture that now felt utterly grotesque. "Alara," he began, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion, "you know how much you mean to me. You are the light of my life, my guiding star. And I want to share this incredible new chapter with you, by my side, forever." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the expectant faces, savoring the moment. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating mix of terror and triumph. This was it. The moment of reckoning. He was about to deliver his grand lie, and I was about to dismantle his entire carefully constructed world. The game was about to reach its explosive climax, and I was ready. "I am so thrilled to announce," Julian continued, his voice booming with false sincerity, "that my new venture, Ascension Dynamics, has secured a major investment. We're officially launching next month, and it's going to be huge. This means we can finally start building the life we've always dreamed of, Alara." He beamed at me, a dazzling, confident smile that had once melted my heart but now curdled my stomach. A ripple of applause and excited murmurs spread through the room. My mother let out a little sob of joy, my friends rushed forward to congratulate him. He was playing the long game, I realized. This wasn't the engagement announcement. This was the setup. The grand justification for his absences, his vague stories, his sudden influx of cash. He was weaving a narrative of success, of a bright future, to further entrench me in his web of lies, to make any future discovery of his infidelity seem like a minor hiccup in his grand, successful life. He was setting the stage for a future where he could seamlessly transition between two lives, using his success as a shield. The audacity was breathtaking. But I had anticipated this. I had seen the subtle shifts in his recent conversations, the way he'd been dropping hints about a breakthrough at work. He was a master manipulator, always several steps ahead, always crafting a plausible story. But he hadn't anticipated me. He hadn't anticipated that I would be watching, listening, gathering my own evidence. As the congratulations died down, and Julian, still beaming, pulled me closer, I felt a surge of cold fury. This was my moment. Not his. I gently but firmly pulled my hand away from his, stepping slightly back, just enough to create a subtle distance. The smiles on my friends' faces faltered slightly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Julian's smile, however, remained fixed, a little confused, but still confident. "What is it, love?" he whispered, his voice still laced with his usual charm, but with a hint of impatience. I took a deep breath, the scent of lemon bars and expensive cologne filling my nostrils. My voice, when it came out, was steady, clear, and surprisingly calm. "Julian," I began, my gaze sweeping across the faces of our friends and family, their expressions shifting from joy to confusion, then to concern. That's not the only announcement we have tonight, is it? His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, surprise? Fear? Crossed his face, quickly masked by a practiced frown of confusion. What do you mean, darling? He asked, his voice a little too smooth, a little too innocent. I continued, my voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow against his carefully constructed facade. There's another announcement. A more personal one. One that involves a woman named Lila Dubois. The name hung in the air, a sudden, shocking silence descending upon the room. The smiles vanished. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. My friends exchanged horrified glances. Julian's face went utterly blank, his honey eyes hardening, his jaw clenching. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He knew. He knew I knew. Alara, I don't know what you're talking about, he began, his voice low, a warning note in it, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the damage. He was already trying to regain control, to spin the narrative. This is inappropriate. You're making a scene. His tone was dismissive, condescending, the familiar gaslighting beginning to seep in. But I was ready for it. Oh, I think I know exactly what I'm talking about, Julian, I countered, my voice unwavering. And I think everyone here deserves to know too. Especially since you've been living a double life for the past year, planning a future with someone else, while pretending to build one with me. I reached into the pocket of my dress, my fingers closing around the slim USB drive I had prepared. I have all the details right here. Photos, financial records, a timeline of your business trips that conveniently align with your romantic getaways with Ms. Dubois. I held up the USB drive, a small, unassuming object that now felt like a weapon. The color drained from Julian's face. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes wide with panic. Alara, stop this. You're being delusional. You're sick, he hissed, his voice barely a whisper, laced with a desperate fury. He took a step towards me, his hand reaching out, as if to snatch the drive. But I stepped back, out of his reach. No, Julian, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. I'm not delusional. I'm finally seeing clearly. And I'm not sick. You are. You're a liar and a cheat, and you've manipulated everyone in this room, especially me. I looked directly at my mother, whose face was a mask of shock and confusion. Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry. I know how much you loved him. But he's not who you think he is. My father, usually a man of few words, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Julian, what is she talking about? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Julian stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. Mr. Davies, I don't know. Alara is clearly unwell. She's been under a lot of stress lately, and she's imagining things. He was still trying to gaslight, even now, in front of everyone. The sheer audacity of it fueled my resolve. Am I, Julian? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Am I imagining the engagement ring you bought for Lila? The one I found in your search history, and then saw on her Instagram on her finger? I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the horror dawn on the faces around me. Am I imagining the cufflinks, Julian? The ones with the elegant L engraved on them? The ones you wore to a black tie gala with her last week, while telling me you were working late? I saw his eyes flicker to his wrist, as if checking for the cufflinks, a tell that confirmed everything. He was wearing a different pair tonight. The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and angry murmurs. My friends, who had been standing frozen, now surged forward, their faces a mixture of shock and protective anger. Julian, is this true? One of my closest friends, Sarah, demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. He looked around, trapped, his eyes desperate. No. It's not. She's lying. "She's trying to ruin me," he shouted, his voice cracking, the charming facade finally shattering, revealing the ugly, desperate man beneath. He lunged for me, his hand outstretched, but my brother, Mark, who had been standing silently by, stepped in front of me, blocking him. "Don't you dare touch her," Mark growled, his voice low and menacing. Julian recoiled, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You'll regret this, Elara. You'll regret this for the rest of your life," he snarled, his face contorted with rage. "No, Julian," I said, my voice calm, almost serene, despite the chaos swirling around me. "You will. Because now everyone knows the truth. And you can't lie your way out of this one." I looked at my parents, their faces etched with pain and disappointment. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said, my voice softening slightly. But I couldn't let him continue to deceive us all. My mother, tears streaming down her face, rushed forward and pulled me into a fierce hug. My father put a comforting hand on my shoulder, his gaze fixed on Julian, a silent promise of retribution in his eyes. Julian, seeing that his game was up, that his carefully constructed world had irrevocably collapsed, turned and stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the stunned silence that followed, a final, dramatic punctuation mark on the end of our relationship. The air was thick with the aftermath of the explosion, the lingering scent of betrayal and shattered trust. My friends and family gathered around me, their faces a mixture of sympathy, anger, and profound sadness. The humiliation was still there, a hot flush on my cheeks, but it was now overshadowed by a strange sense of liberation. The truth, finally, was out. And it was messy, painful, and utterly devastating. But it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The road ahead would be difficult, I knew, filled with heartache and the arduous task of rebuilding my life. But I was no longer blind. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And that, in itself, was a victory. The immediate aftermath was a blur of concerned faces, hushed conversations, and the overwhelming feeling of being both utterly exposed and strangely unburdened. My mother, bless her heart, immediately took charge, shooing away well-meaning but overwhelmed guests, while my father and brother stood like silent sentinels, their anger a palpable force in the room. Sarah, my best friend, pulled me aside, her eyes blazing with a protective fury. "I can't believe him, Elara. I can't believe he would do something like this. He seemed so perfect." Her voice was laced with a mixture of shock and personal betrayal, a reflection of how deeply Julian had managed to ingratiate himself into our lives. The questions came in a torrent, gentle at first, then more insistent. "How long? How did you find out? Are you okay?" I recounted the story, the cufflinks, the phone, the laptop, Lila's Instagram, the engagement ring. Each detail, spoken aloud, made the reality of it even more stark, even more painful. My voice was hoarse, my throat raw from the effort of speaking the unspeakable. My parents listened in stunned silence, their faces a roadmap of disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. My mother kept shaking her head, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. "I just don't understand," she whispered. "He seemed so devoted to you, honey. So genuine." The pain in her voice was almost as sharp as my own. My brother, Mark, was the first to break the stunned silence with a practical question. "Where's he going to go? Does he have another place?" I just shrugged, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. "Probably back to Lila. He's been living a whole other life, remember? A fully furnished one, I imagine." The bitterness was a raw taste in my mouth. My father, his jaw tight, simply said, "We'll deal with him. He won't get away with this." The quiet menace in his voice was a small comfort. The next few days were a strange mixture of grief and administrative tasks. I changed the locks on the apartment door, feeling a grim satisfaction as the old key, his key, became useless. I started the process of separating our finances, a tedious and emotionally draining task. Every joint bill, every shared subscription, every reminder of our intertwined lives was a fresh stab of pain. He had contributed to some household expenses, but the bulk of his income, I now realized, had been diverted to his other life. I felt foolish, exploited, and deeply resentful. He had not only stolen my trust and my love, but he had also siphoned off my financial security. Social media became a minefield. The news of the public breakup spread like wildfire through our mutual friends' circles. My phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, outrage, and morbid curiosity. Some friends were genuinely empathetic, offering to bring food, to just sit with me, to listen. Others, the more superficial acquaintances, were clearly just there for the drama, their questions thinly veiled attempts to get more juicy details. I tried to navigate it all with a semblance of grace, but it was exhausting. I deleted all photos of Julian from my own profiles, a painful but necessary act of severing ties. I blocked him on every platform, a small act of defiance. I even considered making a public statement, a short, concise post confirming the breakup and the reasons, but decided against it. My public announcement had been in person, and that felt more powerful, more real. Let the rumors swirl. The truth had already been delivered where it mattered most. The hardest part was the quiet moments, when the adrenaline wore off and the silence of the apartment pressed in. The empty space beside me in bed, the absence of his familiar scent, the quiet hum of the refrigerator where his terrible lemon bars used to sit. The memories, once cherished, now felt tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of his deception. Every "I love you" he'd whispered, every tender touch, every shared laugh, they all felt like part of the elaborate performance. Had any of it been real? Had he ever truly loved me, or had I just been a convenient placeholder, a comfortable illusion while he pursued his true desires elsewhere? The thought was a torment, a constant loop in my mind. I started therapy, something I'd always considered but never prioritized. My therapist, a kind, insightful woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, helped me navigate the labyrinth of emotions. She validated my anger, my grief, my sense of betrayal, and helped me understand the insidious nature of gaslighting. He systematically undermined your perception of reality, Alara, she explained gently. That's a profound violation of trust, and it leaves deep scars. It's not just about the infidelity, it's about the psychological abuse. Her words were a revelation, giving a name to the confusion and self-doubt I had experienced. It wasn't just me, it was his deliberate manipulation. That understanding was empowering. My friends and family rallied around me. Sarah organized a girls' night that turned into a tearful, cathartic session of Julian bashing and shared outrage. My brother, Mark, helped me pack up Julian's remaining belongings, his presence a silent, comforting strength. My father, in a rare display of emotion, told me he was proud of my courage, that I had handled it with more strength than he could have imagined. Their unwavering support was a balm to my wounded soul, a reminder that I was not alone, that I was loved, and that my worth was not defined by Julian's betrayal. One afternoon, a week after the explosion, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was from Lila Dubois. My heart leaped into my throat. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Should I open it? What could she possibly want? Curiosity, stronger than my fear, won out. The message was short, surprisingly direct. Alara, I saw your post. I had no idea. I am so sorry. Can we talk? My post? I hadn't made a public post. Then it hit me, Julian must have told her I had, or perhaps someone else had informed her. The web of lies was still unraveling, even now. I stared at the message, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. Part of me wanted to lash out, to blame her, to unleash all my pain and anger. But another part, the part that was trying to grow and heal, recognized that she, too, was a victim of Julian's deception. She had been living a lie, just like me. Perhaps even a deeper one, given the engagement ring. I decided to respond. Yes, we can talk. But not over text. Call me. I sent the message, my heart pounding. This was a dangerous step, a dive deeper into the wreckage, but something compelled me. I needed to understand the full scope of his deception, to hear it from another perspective. I needed to know how he had managed to construct such an elaborate double life, how he had fooled not just me, but her, and presumably, her entire family. The phone rang almost immediately. I took a deep breath and answered. Lila's voice, when she spoke, was trembling, laced with a raw, desperate pain that mirrored my own. Elara? Thank you for calling me back. I don't even know where to begin. I'm so utterly devastated. And so sorry. She sounded genuinely distraught, not defensive or angry. We talked for hours, a surreal, painful conversation that pieced together the full, horrifying tapestry of Julian's lies. She had met him over a year ago, at a charity gala. He had presented himself as a successful, single entrepreneur, charming and attentive. He had told her a completely different version of his life, a fabricated past of a difficult childhood and a lonely struggle to success. He had even invented a deceased fiancé, a tragic backstory designed to elicit sympathy and explain his emotional guardedness. He had told her he was looking for a fresh start, a new beginning, and that she was the woman he had been waiting for. He had introduced her to his family, a carefully selected group of actors, she now realized, paid to play the part of his estranged relatives at a few key events. He had even taken her to a family cabin for a weekend getaway, a cabin he had rented specifically for the occasion, complete with staged photos to make it look like a cherished family heirloom. The engagement ring, she confirmed, was real. He had proposed to her 3 months ago, and they had been planning a wedding for next spring. He had even started sending out save-the-dates to her family and friends, using a fake email address and a burner phone to manage the logistics, all while telling her he was too busy with work to help with the details. The depth of his deception was truly astonishing. He had created an entire parallel universe, a meticulously crafted illusion, and had been living in it with breathtaking ease. He had even used the Ascension Dynamics story with her, spinning it as his big break, the reason he was finally ready to settle down. Lila revealed that Julian had been using a different name with her family and friends, a slightly altered version of his middle name, making it harder to trace. He had also claimed to be from a different city, a few states away, explaining his frequent business trips as visits to his ailing mother, who lived there. The layers of his lies were so intricate, so interwoven, that it was almost impossible to untangle them. She had been completely blind, just like me, swept up in his charm and his carefully constructed narrative. She was heartbroken, humiliated, and utterly shattered. She had already broken off the engagement, of course, and was trying to process the fact that the man she was planning to marry was a pathological liar. We found a strange, painful solidarity in our shared victimhood, two women brought together by the same man's monstrous deception. We exchanged notes, piecing together the timeline, the inconsistencies, the subtle manipulations. It was a horrifying puzzle, but together, we started to see the full, grotesque picture. Lila had also discovered that Julian had been siphoning money from her accounts, small amounts at first, then larger sums, always with a plausible explanation. He had claimed he needed a temporary loan for startup expenses or emergency medical bills for his ailing mother. She had, in her trusting love, given him access to her savings, her investments, even taken out a small loan for him. He had not only cheated us emotionally but financially exploited us both, systematically draining our resources to fund his elaborate double life and his lavish lifestyle. The rage that surged through me was cold and precise. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore, it was about justice. It was about exposing him not just as a liar, but as a criminal. We ended the call with a shared sense of purpose, a quiet resolve to ensure he faced consequences far beyond a public breakup. The game had just escalated, and now, there were two of us playing. The conversation with Lila ignited a new kind of fire within me. The raw, emotional pain was still there, a constant ache, but it was now overshadowed by a burning desire for justice. This wasn't just about my broken heart, it was about the systematic psychological and financial abuse he had inflicted on two women. Lila and I continued to communicate, sharing every scrap of information, every memory, every detail that could help us build a comprehensive case against him. We discovered that he had used similar tactics on previous partners, a pattern of charm, deception, and financial exploitation that stretched back years. He was a serial con artist, a predator who preyed on trusting women, and we were just his latest victims. The realization was chilling. We decided to approach the authorities. It was a daunting step, filled with fear and uncertainty, but we knew it was necessary. We compiled all the evidence, the screenshots, the financial records, the detailed timelines, the inconsistencies in his stories, the fake family members. We even found a few online forums where other women had shared similar stories of being conned by men with strikingly similar modus operandi. It was a terrifying but validating discovery. We weren't alone, and this wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a criminal pattern. The police, initially skeptical, became more engaged as we presented the sheer volume and meticulous detail of our evidence. The financial fraud aspect, in particular, caught their attention. The news of Julian's true nature began to spread beyond our immediate circles. Lila, being a public figure in her profession, had a wider network, and once her story started to emerge, it created a ripple effect. Her colleagues and clients, who had met Julian and been charmed by his fabricated persona, were stunned. The Ascension Dynamics story, which he had used to impress both of us and our respective social circles, began to unravel under scrutiny. Journalists, sensing a compelling story, started to dig. The carefully constructed narrative of the successful entrepreneur, the charming, self-made man, began to crumble under the weight of truth. Julian, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. His phone was off, his social media accounts deactivated. He had vanished, presumably trying to escape the consequences of his actions. But Lila and I, fueled by a shared determination, were relentless. We worked with the police, providing every detail, every lead. We even hired a private investigator, a former detective, who helped us track down some of his previous victims, women who had been too ashamed or too broken to come forward before. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to ours, tales of charm, manipulation, financial ruin, and shattered trust. It became clear that Julian wasn't just a serial cheater, he was a professional fraudster, a master of identity manipulation, preying on people's hopes and dreams. The public humiliation Julian had inflicted on me at our apartment was now turning back on him, magnified 1,000-fold. The story of the charming entrepreneur who was secretly a serial con artist, living a double life and defrauding multiple women, became a national sensation. News articles, online exposés, and social media discussions erupted, dissecting his elaborate web of lies. His face, once a symbol of charm and success, was now plastered across headlines, synonymous with deceit and betrayal. The Ascension Dynamics venture, his supposed big break, was revealed to be nothing more than a shell company, a fraudulent scheme designed to extract money from investors and unsuspecting women. The irony was bitter, but satisfying. The emotional toll, however, was immense. Even with the growing momentum for justice, the grief and trauma of the betrayal lingered. I had days where I felt utterly numb, days where a sudden memory would trigger a fresh wave of tears, and days where the anger was so intense it felt like it would consume me. Dr. Sharma continued to be my anchor, helping me process the complex emotions, teaching me coping mechanisms, and reminding me that healing was a marathon, not a sprint. She emphasized the importance of self-compassion, of allowing myself to feel the pain without judgment, and of recognizing my own strength in navigating such a devastating experience. My relationship with my family deepened through the crisis. My parents, initially heartbroken, were now fiercely protective and supportive. My father, in particular, took Julian's financial exploitation personally, seeing it as an attack on his family. He leveraged his own professional network to help us navigate the legal complexities, ensuring we had the best possible representation. My brother, Mark, became my unwavering confidant, always ready with a listening ear, a comforting hug, or a sarcastic remark that would make me laugh despite myself. Sarah and my other close friends were a constant source of love and distraction, pulling me out of the apartment for walks, movie nights, and endless cups of coffee. Their unwavering belief in me, even when I doubted myself, was invaluable. Lila and I formed an unlikely but powerful bond. We were united by our shared trauma, but also by a shared mission. We became each other's support system, two survivors navigating the wreckage together. We spent hours on the phone, discussing legal strategies, sharing updates, and simply commiserating. We even met in person a few times, a strange but comforting experience, seeing the other woman who had been so deeply entangled in Julian's web. We realized that our combined strength was far greater than our individual pain. We were not just victims, we were a force for justice. The climax of Julian's downfall came swiftly. Thanks to the combined efforts of the police, our private investigator, and the public pressure generated by the media attention, Julian was finally apprehended. He was found hiding out in a remote cabin, using another fake identity, still trying to evade capture. The news of his arrest was a moment of profound, quiet satisfaction. There were no cheers, no celebrations, just a deep, collective sigh of relief. He would finally face the consequences of his actions. The legal process would be long and arduous, but at least now, there was a path to accountability. The court proceedings were grueling, a public airing of all the painful details, but Lila and I stood strong, testifying against him, presenting our evidence with unwavering resolve. Julian, stripped of his charm and his carefully constructed persona, looked pathetic, a shadow of the man he had once pretended to be. He tried to deny, to deflect, to gaslight, but the overwhelming evidence, combined with the testimony of his other victims, left him no room to maneuver. The judge, after hearing all the evidence, delivered a harsh sentence, citing the systematic nature of his fraud and the profound emotional and financial damage he had inflicted. It wasn't just a victory for us, it was a victory for all the women he had wronged, a testament to the power of collective truth and resilience. In the months that followed, life slowly, painstakingly, began to rebuild. The apartment, once a place of shattered dreams, began to feel like home again. I redecorated, purging it of any lingering reminders of Julian, filling it with things that brought me joy and reflected my own evolving sense of self. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into new projects, finding a renewed sense of purpose and accomplishment. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, sharing my story, offering support and guidance to others who had experienced abuse and betrayal. It was a way of transforming my pain into something meaningful, of using my experience to help others. My emotional growth was profound. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize red flags, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own well-being. I learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding pain, but about facing it head-on, processing it, and emerging stronger. I learned that love, real love, was built on honesty, respect, and mutual trust, not on elaborate illusions and carefully constructed lies. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who had fallen for Julian's charm. I was a survivor, resilient and self-aware, with a newfound appreciation for authenticity and genuine connection. The scars were still there, a permanent reminder of the pain, but they were also a testament to my strength, to my ability to heal and to rebuild. Lila and I remained close friends, our bond forged in the crucible of shared trauma. We often met for coffee, sharing stories, laughing, and supporting each other as we navigated our respective healing journeys. We talked about the future, about dating again, about the lessons we had learned. We were two women who had been broken by the same man, but who had found strength and solidarity in each other, turning a devastating betrayal into a powerful story of resilience and sisterhood. Julian's name, once a source of searing pain, now evoked a quiet indifference, a distant memory of a nightmare that had finally ended. He was behind bars, his power over us gone, his lies exposed for the world to see. The final chapter of my story wasn't about revenge, not in the petty sense. It was about justice, about truth, and about reclaiming my own life. It was about transforming a devastating betrayal into a catalyst for profound personal growth. I was still healing, still learning, but I was moving forward, one courageous step at a time. The world, once shattered, was slowly piecing itself back together, not into the perfect, naive image I had once held, but into something stronger, more real, and infinitely more beautiful in its imperfections. I was free. And that, in itself, was everything.